How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video, and it seems we have this article over here by none other than PC Gamer talking about a leaked email revealing Phil Spencer's damning verdict on AAA games. Most publishers are riding the success of franchises created 10 plus years ago. Now, this was published in 2023, and it's something that's been out for a while now, but it is something that was brought to my attention today, and I wanted to talk about it because what he says in this, because this was part of the recent Microsoft document leaks with all the emails that went out in regards to the FTC trial. So there's a lot here that needs to be unpacked, and I thought I'd go through this because it's not so much damning, but it is a very constructive way at looking at things, and clearly the cost of AAA gaming isn't going down. Sean Layden was actually very concerned about this and saying that constantly going for that AAA approach, high production approach, was cool and everything, but it came at a cost. And, with that cost, there's going to be some unfortunate issues if the game doesn't do well, doesn't sell, doesn't peak, doesn't cover the costs. And, this has been an ongoing trend, and it's one of the reasons why I feel like Xbox, they may do some AAA games, but they focus more on the AA games to keep those costs low. If you look at games like Ghost of Tsushima costing $60 million to make, that's a much better game. That's 10 times better than Spider-Man 2. And Spider-Man 2 cost over $300 million. Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games on PlayStation, and anyone that's actually played it will tell you so, that game is phenomenal, from its story to its combat to its stealth. Everything about that game is just beautiful, and Sucker Punch worked miracles. And the fact that it only cost $60 million compared to the $200 million for Spider-Man, what in Spider-Man actually cost $300 million? Considering the assets were pretty much there already, right? You kind of have to start to question these things. Is it really worth it? Would you class Ghost of Tsushima as a AA or a AAA game? And if you class it as a AA, would you say it's better than Spider-Man 2? Because that's the poster child that's being used here. So let's go through this article and see what it says. A whole lot of interesting and occasionally awkward secrets were revealed by the big Microsoft document leak that occurred last week. This was back in September. One of the most notable bits was a brutally frank analysis by Xbox boss Phil Spencer on the current state of major video game publishers like Activision and Electronic Arts. Now, this is actually more relevant today because of the news that came out yesterday about Electronic Arts actually, letting go almost 700 people and turning around and saying that they're basically stopping their existing IPs that are, partnered with, like Star Wars, and focusing more on their own IPs, which have a much less cost attached to them. Don't forget, Marvel, Disney, they require a lot of royalties to have these games on their platform. And they just soak all that money up for doing absolutely nothing other than giving you the right to use those characters, who Spencer said are struggling to find relevance in an industry that just doesn't need them like it used to. Back in pre-Steam days, when video games were purchased in physical stores, shelf price, literal limited shelf space, was vital. If you couldn't find a spot to display your game, again, an actual spot on the shelf that you had to go into an actual store to see, this is how we did it back then. It's true. That is really true. If you didn't see it on the shelf, you just didn't know it existed. So companies had to make sure that their game was center stage on those shelves. Then your hope for becoming a hit with the general public was basically zero. Yes, you could sell directly to gamers through ads placed in magazines like PC Gamer, but that's not going to get you any traction with slightly befuddled family members looking for gifts at the holidays. It's true. Like when my mum goes to a shop, she doesn't care about she doesn't know anything about video games, but if she wants to buy, like when we were kids, a video game, she would either ask the person at the desk, what's the best video game for this thing that my son would like, or she would look at the shelf and say, right, this looks cool, and pick that up. If it's not there, she's generally not going to question it. That's where the big publishers came into play. By leveraging their size, they could ensure spots on shelves and high visibility promotion for games in ways that individual developers simply could not. Basically, indies. As Spencer wrote in his leaked email via Kotaku, if you were a studio, you needed a AAA publisher to reach a customer at an egghead software. In the era of digital distribution, however, access to physical distribution channels is no longer required because everything is digital, right? You just need to go in your digital store, and anything that they want to publish to you as a selling point. If Capcom wants their game to be center stage, they say to Microsoft, hey, I want this to be the first thing that people see when they come to your storefront. That's it. There's no thing. There's a carousel there, and they can constantly swipe it through the carousel. That's led big publishers to lean onto their strength, and making a big budget blockbusters are out of the reach of smaller operations. Very few companies can afford to spend the $200 million an Activision or Take-Two spend to put a title like Call of Duty or Red Dead Redemption on the shelf, Spencer wrote. These AAA publishers have mostly used this production scale to keep their top franchises in top-selling games each year, basically the digital storefronts. But that approach creates problems of its own, according to Spencer, who said that the hurdle rate on these massive productions, essentially the minimum rate of return that major publishers will accept in order to move ahead with a project, is so high that it discourages a willingness to take a risk on anything. So what that actually means there is that, let's use Spider-Man as an example. I know it's 315, but let's use it at 300 million. They could turn around and say, right, what we actually want is a 10% increase in growth on our costs spending. Will we get that from that 300 million? And the chances are the answer's no. So if they were to come up with another game that's not as popular as Spider-Man, but the production cost was going to be 300 million, just look at Immortals of Avium. High production cost there, the game didn't sell well and it bombed. But let's say that was 300 million to develop and they wanted a 5% return. Right? That's 15 million on top. If they didn't get that 300 million in sales to cover their costs, I'm not talking, and that's, excluding the overall cost of this person takes 30%, that person takes that percent. So you're not even getting 100% of the sale. You're only getting about 50% of the sale. So you would need to sell 600% in order to get the actual, well, my percentages are probably wrong, but you're getting the point I'm making in order to hit that 300 million. But then you want to make sure you get an additional 15% on top of that out of 5% growth per 100 million in terms of profits. It becomes a lot more unsustainable and a lot more risky. And at that point, you ask yourself, is it worth the risk? And they say no, and that game gets shelved. Now, if the game is going to cost you 50 million to make, that risk is worth taking, because at that point, if you turn around and say, I want a 5% profit margin on this, or a 10% profit margin on this, it becomes a lot more sustainable and a lot more easier achievable. That's why smaller games are now coming out with like really good returns, whereas the bigger games are actually struggling in this day and age. You've seen a rise of AAA publishers using rented IP to try offset the risk. Again, Star Wars with EA, Spider-Man with Sony, Avatar with Ubisoft. Spencer continued, this same dynamic has obviously played out in Hollywood as well, with Netflix creating more new IP than any of the movie studios. And Netflix has been pumping out new IP for a long time now. This was 2023, but they are still doing it. And the reason behind this is, if they were to go and make another Lethal Weapon, they would have to go to the franchise owner of Lethal Weapon and buy that license to use that movie. If it's a new movie, a new IP, they don't have to do any of that. All of that cost gets negated. They could easily make a Star Wars clone that isn't, doesn't follow the Star Wars storyline, follows a new era of, space travel, space politics and whatever, and put it out there with new characters. Sure, the upfront cost may be a little more, but it's their IP at the end of the day. They can churn that, and if it's a success, they can churn multiple sequels from that using the same characters, adding characters as they go along to that. Instead, right now, using the Star Wars IP is pretty horrible because of the amount of royalties you need to pay these people in order to get the use of that license. Just look at the way FIFA wanted double the money, and in the end, EA said no. Our games aren't successful because of the FIFA branding. And it's proven that this year, because it is still one of the most sold games in football games. And secondly, everyone still calls it FIFA. FIFA really did lose out on that one. The net result, Spencer concluded, is stagnation. AAA publishers are milking their top franchises, but struggling to refill their portfolio of hit franchises. Most AAA publishers are riding the success of franchises created 10 years ago. And if we're looking at Microsoft, it's like Halo, Gears, Forza. If we're looking at PlayStation, it's the likes of Uncharted, The Last of Us, these sorts of games that are there and constantly being milked with remakes and remasters. That's why it's happening, because those games potentially can still be squeezed for more. You're going to see The Last of Us 3. You was potentially going to have factions before they decided to cancel it for no good reason. But this is where it's at. The point of Spencer's email was to emphasize his belief that as major publishers find their footing eroded, subscription services like Xbox Game Pass offered them a lifeline. He noted that EA and Ubisoft were both trying to build their own competing services, but said they are not moving quickly or bold enough to scale, and also suffer from the lack of a platform like Xbox console to launch with. Now, this is really important because I've been saying this for a long time, right? The fact is that Microsoft has a huge opportunity here. There is such a big advantageous position because they have a console, they have a platform. So when it comes to Game Pass, selling 50 million consoles means you're going to sell 50 million versions of Game Pass, right? It's just one of those things. It's really rare that you're going to find someone who doesn't have Game Pass, one Game Pass form or another, on their platform. But if you don't have a platform, it becomes a lot more risky, a lot more dangerous, because at that point you've got nothing to attach it to. And this is why console sales are really important. I know a lot of people look at Sony and laugh at them because of, they constantly badger on about console sales. And there's some truth to that, because at the end of the day, they're buying the console, but they're not buying enough games. And that then creates that disparity. But the problem with the benefit that Microsoft has is that it's not about buying the games, it's about subscribing to Game Pass. Whether it's Game Pass Console or Game Pass Ultimate, as long as they're on one of those two, or even just Game Pass Core, right? But Game Pass Core is its own thing. But Game Pass Console and Ultimate is where you want to be. And as long as they're on that, that's where it's actually bringing in the money. If you're looking at 50 million subs at £11, that's a lot of money, right? A lot of money. We're talking about $6 to $8 billion. So that's crazy amount of money. And that's per year, right? That's not like monthly. And monthly, I think it comes to like £450 million. That's a lot of money. Every month that's churning in. No, the actual current 34 million is about 400 million. So at 50 million, you're looking at about 500-600 million a month. So it's crazy money that we're talking about here. And that's what a subscription service does. It's steady income, and companies love this. Where were we? Spencer said he wasn't looking to kill off big publishers with Game Pass, though, but to help them build towards a successful future, by giving them access to a massive user base that they can monetize as they see fit. Spencer's words were at least partly prophetic. 6 months after this email was sent in March 2020, EA announced that it was bringing its EA Play subscription service to Game Pass at no additional charge. But what I think is more interesting is the harsh but fair analysis of the state of big publishers. Some of them occasionally nod to novel content. Take-Two's Private Division label is one example that leaps to mind, but for the most part they just keep returning to the well. It's a formula that's been successful. I fully expect the internet will melt when Grand Theft Auto 6 is actually revealed, and Grand Theft Auto 6 shouldn't be used as a benchmark here. It's one of the most anticipated games of all time, more than any other game ever. And the reality is, it's going to sell, but it's an enigma. The same with Baldur's Gate 3. Those games are enigmas. They're not the norm. Palworld, Helldivers. Well, I wouldn't say Helldivers. That's not proven itself yet. But, Palworld having reached 2 million concurrent users. They're good games, but they're not the norm. That's just not the norm. But it's also, as Spencer said, resulted in a state of near torpor at the highest levels of big budget game development. One of the most anticipated games of 2023 is Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, a reboot of a sequel in a spin-off series that's using recycled maps as a marketing point. And, you know, we all saw how Modern Warfare 3 released. The gaming media didn't like the campaign because it was recycled stuff. They didn't like the multiplayer maps, even though a lot of people were asking for the recycled multiplayer maps. They were pretty much against it and didn't like it. But ultimately, it didn't do so well in the review rating. But none of that mattered in the grand scheme of things because the game was still top of the list for most selling games. And people may have tried to downplay it by saying, oh, this game did better at this time and that game did better at this time. But COD came out in, what, November? And it managed to beat almost every game that year? And it, you know, the only game that actually did beat it was released in January with Hogwarts. It took it took Hogwarts Legacy 12 months of sales to actually beat marginally. I think it was really, really small margin that they actually took the pole position over a whole year compared to one game that came out less than 2 months before the end of the year. That just tells you how powerful Call of Duty is. No matter what the reviewers say and how much IGN wants to bash it and try to diminish it because it's now an Xbox-owned platform, it really doesn't matter. It's going to sell, and this is the reason why Microsoft went for companies like Mojang with Minecraft, like Activision, Blizzard King with Call of Duty and Candy Crush, because these games bring in a lot of money. And maybe, you know, Call of Duty is a AAA game. Mojang is not. Candy Crush is not. And those games are just going to churn. But then there's also a bunch of other games in there that just are not AAA that are bringing in revenue. And this over here is a really good article, in my opinion. One that I'm surprised PC Gamer actually wrote. But it's actually a lot of truth because, you know, AAA gaming, they're relying on the back catalogue of games that have released years ago with the franchises. When was the last time Sony released a brand new AAA franchise that they pumped in 200-300 million into, expecting it to do as well or get the 10-15 million? God of War is a pre-existing franchise. Spider-Man's a pre-existing franchise. Ghost of Tsushima wasn't. But is that a AAA or is that a AA? I think that's more AA. But in my opinion, that AA is better than a lot of what they've got out there already. It just goes to show that investing all this money into a game is a high risk. And the more you do this, the more investment that you do in these sorts of games, the less risk you can take. Because all it takes right now is for the next big AAA Spider-Man game that's coming. I think Venom is coming next. All it takes is for that to monumentally fail. And that less than 5% margin that they have right now will dwindle to maybe 2% or 1% and could actually go into the negative. If you're spending that much money on these games, your margins are dependent on those games selling. And if they don't, you'll find yourself in big trouble. And this is why Microsoft, though they're releasing all these games, you never really see them pushing to that truly next level. Avowed isn't that next level. It looks amazing. And until I play it, I won't know. But just from the videos, it doesn't look like it's hit that next level that I'm expecting from these consoles. Hellblade seems to be there. But I'll, you know, judge that when I play it, depending on how it looks more when I'm actually playing it and so forth. But, you know, Hellblade is the only one that I see right now that's actually there. Indiana Jones looks great, but it still looks like a AA to me compared to a AAA. But that's not a problem. That's not a bad thing. I expect more AA games to come through with the occasional AAA for the flagships like Elder Scrolls 6, Halo, Gears, Forza. Your tentpole titles need to be at that level. The rest should be at a much lower scale. Because those games that are lower scale will buffer the rest of your games up. Anyway, folks, you let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let's have that discussion. I am 370 subs away from hitting 7,000 subs, which is my next milestone. Let's see if we can hit that and, you know, make me a really happy person. Let's see if we can get 300 likes for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Remain legend.